is Miranda, and today I am here to review Smells Like Teen Spirit by Kate Williams, which is the third and final book in the Babysitter's Coven trilogy. I first read the two books in this series when they came out, and then I didn't get around to reading the third one just because I was in a bit of a reading slump when it came out, but I had bought it like right when it came out, and I just never got around to reading it. So I'm really trying to do my darn bestest to get through a bunch of books that have been on my TBR list for a while and have just been like sitting on my shelf. So this was one of them that I was definitely interested in reading, and because of that, to prepare for it, since it has been about a year since I first read the second book, I reread the other ones. So I got those from the library, read them all, got through them, and then got over to this one. And I will say reading them was a very interesting experience, the other two again, because I loved the first one and I still love the first one. And I enjoyed it even more because I feel like now knowing like what happens with Dion and all that, like that stuff didn't annoy me as much as it did when I first read it and thinking it was just gonna be like this weird insta-lovey kind of romance. Like knowing how that turns out, I was like, okay, I can enjoy this more and see like where this feels weird, it's supposed to feel weird, and that was super helpful. And then the second book, I didn't like. And reading it again after reading the first one and loving the first one so much, reading it so quickly after loving that one, really made me cement the fact that I didn't like it. I don't know what happened with the second one, but it was just like not for me. Like I feel like it added too many characters, and it was like all of a sudden the things that you had been about in the first one that I really liked, like the small town setting and the characters and all that, like it was all flipped for like these new villains and this new place and these new sitters, and it was just a lot of like newness that I felt like didn't really work. And I also felt like it had again the issue that I've had with the first two books that kind of also happened with this one, is I feel like they build up to this final fight, right? And they get the final fight, and you know how like when you have a final fight, you have to have stages of the final fight, right? Like before you get to the final part of the final fight. So I feel like, especially in the first one and in this one, and a little bit in the second one too, a thing that like annoyed me was I feel like before we got to like the final part of the final fight, like right when we were gearing up for like this is our last stand, like we're finally gonna win, blah blah blah, someone steps in and like takes over a different thing rather than Esme actually getting to defeat the villain herself. That happened definitely in the first book when the Synoid or whatever you call them just showed up and kind of zapped the guy away, and like that was just that. And then this also happened in this one where it was like you thought like, oh, they're gonna fight, and then something just happens to take it and just change it. And I feel like this was also like reading the three of them in order is an interesting journey because they're all so different. Like the settings are always in the town, but like the villains are always different, so then like the things they're investigating are always different. And I will say that the second book is definitely my least favorite. I think this book was a whole lot better. Still not as good as the first, but a whole lot better. I think my main frustration with it is that it just doesn't read like the final installment in a series, and I'm okay with leaving like some loose ends of like, you know, like you guys can like, everyone can kind of make their own ending for this thing or that thing. But the things that were left open-ended were pretty significant and have been things that we've known since book one. So to leave it on like an unfinished note like that kind of feels like a cop-out of just like, yeah, like you wrap it up however you want to. And because of the way that each book is structured around like its own kind of villain, and yes, the villains like do pop back in, obviously, like the names and stuff like that, but really each book has a villain. I think this would have operated so much better as a 4-book series. And part of me is still like, maybe she's planning a 4-book series and like she just like initially got picked up for a trilogy and now wants to write more, but like needs to get picked up. And this is a good way to get picked up if you need it, because a lot of fans are gonna be like, I need another book, what the heck? And then the publisher's gonna be like, all right, write more books. But the acknowledgement at the end is like, oh, like this, how does she phrase it? Like, this might as well be my last book, where it's like, it kind of sounds like she's saying it is, but then like leaving the door open, and I'm just like, like, I think that's what's happening. I think she wants to write a 4th book potentially, and she wasn't picked up for a 4th book originally. It was a trilogy, which is fine if you want to write more, but like to leave it on a cliffhanger like this is a little frustrating. It's a lot frustrating actually, because I remember like reading the summary of this, it explains very well like what the book's going to be about, how there's this new band in town that has shown up and they are dealing with some type of red magic, which we've known about since book 1. So that kind of connects, you know, I was okay with that. And I feel like the way they explained the villains was really interesting and the build up to it. Like this whole book is basically like building up to a plan they have to take down the band and figure out what's going on. And I think that worked nice. I think it had a good build up of having Janice and Cassandra and even the sitters that I didn't love in the second book. I feel like they were a smaller part in this so that when they were in it, they didn't bug me as much. Like I feel like they actually got to be kind of developed as characters and stuff like that. So they were more interesting to read about and it just felt more organic than just like throwing them in the last one and expecting us to love them. And I felt like it kind of got back to that book 1 where Esme had a bit more of an idea what was going on. So like her personality could shine through and her clothing options were obviously really on point. And it was really exciting to figure out like, okay, what is this? You're getting connections to book 1 kind of and connections a little bit to book 2 and you're kind of seeing how all these villains are obviously working separately, but have a common underlying thread together that you're like, okay, like this is what's going to connect them all. We're finally going to figure it out. So obviously if you've read the first 2 books, you know that her mother's curse is a big thing. Like, duh. And I feel like anyone who's read a book would know that like, hey, that seems to be a main conflict is her mom's curse. And to not really have that developed at all in this book was very frustrating. In fact, her mom is very rarely in it, and I actually really liked her mom in the first book, and just not have any more build up to that and just like halfway through the book be like, peace, like we're gonna figure this out later, but I'm like, there is no later because there's no other book. It's frustrating. And like I hate that it sounds like I'm ragging on this book because I really did like the majority of it. I thought the characters were fun. The setting of like making a school dance where you're getting your like final fight is going to be was fun. And building up to that was really fun. But it's just like the things that were missing from this book were so big that like I can't review this book without talking about them. So like I really did enjoy, I will say, 7/8 of this book, and then the last eighth when you realize, oh, this is it, is when you're like, what? Like there's a thing at the end, the very, very last chapter and practically the last page that's introduced that you're like, what? Like where did this thing even come from that's just so like, it's a good twist, but it's also like, this is how you leave your series, like this is what you pick to leave it on. And then I also feel like the stuff with the band, we know they're red magic users, but it's also not fleshed out very well. They're kind of made to be idiots, and that's kind of how they're always portrayed of and thought of as. So then you're kind of like, well, how did these idiots manage to find red magic in the first place? And we get an explanation of how, but you're like, how? You know, because let's like the way they do it, they seem to have to be a lot smarter, and their motivations are also a little, and then it's like the kind of, there's things that aren't explained that really should be explained better, and it was just frustrating. I feel like that's the feeling I walked away with, because I love the first book so much, and I do feel like so much of this book was so strong, and I feel like a 4th book where they could have drawn this out would have worked amazingly, because you learn more about like talisman and all this in this book, and more about red magic, and it's kind of Esme deciding, you know, maybe I will investigate red magic more, and learning more about like why exactly it's bad, and that like it's not the magic, like it's not red magic in itself that's bad, it's that it corrupts you into like only thinking about like your deepest, darkest desires and stuff like that. So like that's why it's not great, but like obviously if you could resist that, you could use it to help break her mom's curse and stuff like that. And that's where I feel like it clearly, to me, being someone who's read a lot of trilogies and a lot of books that take place over multiple stories, sets up as like, all right, this is our 4th book, we've got a new character who's going to help us, like this is what we're looking for, blah blah blah, and then it's just like, nope, this is my last book, and I'm like, but what? So that's where it was definitely confusing. I did really enjoy the majority of it, like I said, and I think Cassandra and Janice and Esme, who are the core 3 of these books, even though Esme is the narrator, but I feel like they're the core ones. They were really great, and they really all got to shine, and I liked what she did with Dion in this book, and even making it kind of me think like, okay, so is Esme going to end up with Adrian, or is she going to end up with Dion? Because Dion's actually kind of being nice and pleasant in this one, and I feel like that was actually something that I improved upon, because in the second book, I was just like, why are we giving Dion the time of day? Like, he clearly, like, was involved in like this and like helped kidnap Mackenzie and stuff like that, but I feel like this one explained more like his motivations and showed that like really like he was involved, but like he wasn't involved full on, like he didn't realize the extent of it, and it made me connect more to him. Adrian I also liked. We didn't get to see again too much of him. I feel like he was someone I would like to see develop more and learn more about his background and stuff, and he just wasn't. Like I feel like that's kind of the theme, is like aside from like the main characters, you add in all these really cool characters that you're like, oh yeah, I want to learn more about them and see them more developed, and then they're just not. And that's frustrating. And I don't know if that's just like first story, first book kind of, and maybe it'll improve the more and more she writes. But just for it's sad to see the potential in this book and see the potential in this ending and it not be there. Again, I'm not going to be surprised if one day soon it comes out that she's going to write another book in the series, just because it is a pretty big, like, not cliffhanger, but just there's a thing that's not resolved that is pretty like, this needs to get resolved to like be a book. So it's definitely interesting. I still ended up giving it like 3.5, 4 stars. It's good. The story's good for the most part and entertaining, and I love the descriptions of the characters and the dialogue and all that. It's just the wrap-up was just bad. I think the wrap-up for the individual story with the band that's in this one, and then the wrap-up also it being like a end of a series was bad. So that was just disappointing. But I do really enjoy the first book. I think you could potentially just read the first book and end it at that if you really wanted to, because it wraps up about just as much as this book does. So yeah, that's my take on it. But yeah, if you have read this book or this series, please feel free to leave your thoughts about it down in the comments and what you thought of the ending and all that. And if you're also thinking that someday soon there's going to be a 4th book. I know she's writing a different book, like a whole different, I don't know if it's a series or just whatever, but she's writing something different this year. But I just feel like this needs another book. So yeah, leave your thoughts about it down below. Also make sure this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!